My name's Sarah Duffy. I'm based in London. Originally, I'm from a visual arts background, but I've moved into various other different practices and disciplines over the years. What led me down this path was that I did a project many years ago about ventriloquism. I learned how to sing without moving my lips during this period of time. And, I was thinking about the voice being disconnected from the body and the disembodied voice, and about throwing my voice. And as I started to learn more about sound, I found out about spatial sound and ambisonics, and it felt like a new form of ventriloquism that I could play with, as in I could take my voice and I could throw it around a space and I could move it around. I thought that I was all the that is true. And make the voice kind of a sculptural medium. Rather than something ephemeral that just kind of disappears. It's a belly speaker. Usually they have like a puppet, but actually the puppet came about only at the beginning of the 20th century. And previously, ventriloquism was called belly speaking, and it was usually practiced by female religious or spiritual practitioners who would conjure up the voices of gods or demons, mainly to gain some kind of power. And I found this really fascinating, that it was a way of women sort of using their voices to gain power over men. So I thought it would be interesting to try to learn this process myself. And I did over a period of about 7 months. But the thing that I needed to do in order to execute this project was to learn spatial sound. So that was sort of the starting point. As I learned spatial sound, the project started taking on a different kind of meaning, and I started thinking about the way that language interacts with space, about the sound of the language used in these sentences versus the actual meaning of the words. So this project came about 2.5 years ago during the pandemic. I read this article about this urban legends that had been going around in the 90s, where you could ring this particular phone number, and if you did, you would hear this strange electronic voice on the line repeating these weird sentences, such as, "He carved a head from a round block of marble." And I found out that these sentences were something called the Harvard sentences. And actually, the real story behind them is weirder. The real story is that they were developed in a secret psychoacoustic lab in the 1940s at Harvard University. And they were developed to essentially test the audio fidelity of military acoustic technology. So to check that communications were coming over the radio to fighter pilots. And after the war, these sentences became the standard for testing a lot of acoustic technology, from telephone lines to cochlear implants. And so this 90s urban legend, there was actually a telephone number and people could ring the number, but it was actually just a telephone testing line for engineers. And then I started thinking about what audio fidelity means, like what is audio fidelity? And I was learning about deepfake voices at around about the same time. And I was thinking about this idea of the audio fidelity of a deepfake voice, which is, a machine learning process. And all of this came together in my mind with my former work into ventriloquism. There's something about the human voice that reminds me or makes me think about grief or loss in some way. And that kind of goes back to the beginning of recording technology. In the original recordings were, for people to remember their dead loved ones. And it was a way of preserving life or remembering somehow. And, the voice is produced by us, but it leaves our body, it enters into other people's body, and it has this kind of material presence. And it can also outlive us through recording technology.
If absence has a physical presence, then you are it. You are a hole that things disappear into. You're a soundproof room, in the middle of nowhere, in an indefinable space, in an unmarked place.
Like, we often think about language, but we don't necessarily think about the voice itself and the quality of the spoken word. So yeah, it feels worthy of investigation for me. So there are 720 sentences altogether. They're made in lists of 10. And the idea was actually that the sentences were designed to be as phonetically balanced as possible so that they could also be misheard. So you would know that the communication was wrong if someone heard it wrong. But they've come out as these strange vignettes, almost like mini stories, like the crooked maze failed to fool the mouse. Each sentence kind of conjures up this image in your mind, like a little story. And a lot of them are surprisingly violent or strange as well. I think I read something that some of that may be because they were made during this particularly strange time in American history. There's a kind of element of Americana to them. There's like mention of white picket fences, and they definitely don't feel neutral. They feel like they're part of a time. And the ones that I selected, they just felt right to me. Like, it's almost like you could put any of them in any order and they make a strange poem.
Code is used when secrets and sentences live. The thing on top of the pole revolts in the wind. It takes a good track. Touch it. It's there. Mark this box.
The thing that they also remind me of is sort of like code language, that spies would use, or some kind of cipher, like there's another meaning hidden beneath them. And they also kind of make me think of like some strange sort of repetition, like an incantation or a spell, There was a kind of intuition involved in narrowing those sentences down and getting them to just feel right. But also I chose ones that felt quite ambivalent and strange, and like there was almost some kind of violent action that was about to take place. There's a kind of threat involved in some of the sentences. But then I added in like very kind of innocuous ones, such as it's easy to tell the depth of a well. I'm quite focused on the actual spatialization itself, how the voice moves, the way it kind of moves around the listener, the sculptural feeling of the movement of that voice, and the way that the voice is kind of taking a journey in the piece through different rooms or different atmospheres. So I've really gone into a lot of depth into this feeling of spatialization, of creating a real feeling space, where you can feel the distance of the voice, where you can feel the height, where you really do feel like there's something spectral, something ghostly that's moving around you. And I wanted to create something that has musical elements, like there are musical elements to the piece.
It's a solid smile and a few friends. One more step, the boards will clap.
But at the same time is maybe somewhere between something narrative, something musical, something theatrical. I want the audience to have quite an intuitive reaction to the work. There's a lot of context, but I feel that I want them to really kind of experience it as a kind of poetic experience. I do, however, want them to feel this sense of threat that the sentences bring. Perhaps that they've got a kind of viral quality, that they could kind of infect, or that they could be like an earworm that could get into your head. there's perhaps a bit of conflict there in this element of the threat and also the enjoyment of the experience of kind of feeling this spatialization and feeling this kind of poetic balance between the words and the spatialization and the environments that the audience has taken through. I got the opportunity to come on this residency to ICST after a few years working with ambisonics, and it really helped me develop my skills further. I feel that I developed a greater understanding of the spatialization element of ambisonics. Things like distance and a sense of perspective, really, and sound. And I learned how to listen a lot better. Through that activity, I could then start to replicate that in the ambisonic mixes I was creating. I feel that spatial sounds and ambisonics is going to be really important in the future because sound allows us to locate ourselves in space in a way that makes it incredibly immersive. We're used to seeing things on screens all the time. We've kind of almost become desensitized, I guess, to seeing things on screen. But the way that spatial sound works, it really has quite a profound effect on the body. It's quite magical, I would say. I'm not so interested in AI in the sense of, we can create this whole AI version of us after we've died. I'm more interested in the idea of being able to create a kind of spatial memory that doesn't try to replicate us, but just tries to kind of maybe conjure something of our presence up. I've had loved ones that passed away. It's been very meaningful to hear their voice. It's much more meaningful in a way than seeing their face on a screen. It feels more real. It feels like the voice is the essence of a person, or it contains some really important information about a person. And so if you could have this kind of recording of a loved one's voice, but it's spatialized, like it really feels like their presence is there somehow. It feels like a sort of a spatial memory recording rather than just like a stereo recording. I know that's quite abstract and it's something that I have to think about a lot more, but it's something that I'm kind of moving towards thinking about because so much of my work kind of deals with kind of grief or loss in ways that aren't necessarily obvious to the audience at first, but it's kind of always in there. It's quite hard doing interviews. It's like it requires all your brain power because you're like, right, I've got to talk about this thing and I've got to be concise, I've got to be interesting,